Action.
Hi there, we're here for the third in a series of tech videos about the annual inspection of race cars. We are at Bob Carl Sales and Service in Troy, New York. Bob is a longtime supporter of Club Road Racing, and we thank him for providing this venue. I'm with Chip Van Slyke, owner of this 1986 Crossle 62F. And Chip has been racing this car in regional competition for a number of years with some success.
Yes, it is the current. We are the current NYSRC champions. It's an older chassis. You don't see too many of them, but for a regional car, it's a really good car to run.
And so we're just going to walk through this traditional tube frame car and see how it goes together. So, first thing that we should check is to make sure it's the car it says it is. Did you happen to bring the logbook in?
I have it right here.
Okay, so we see a VIN plate here, which is the Crossle identification. And we see that the number that's written in the logbook matches. We could also go looking for the roll cage number, but this is not something that's usually a problem in a car like this. So we know that we are actually inspecting the car we're supposed to. Now the roll cages for an open wheel car are, we call it homologated, which is to say the design of a car like this will have been reviewed by the Club Racing office, which is currently in Topeka. And in the back of the logbook we have what's called the homologation certificate, which is a document basically that shows the car's ID and shows that it has been approved. And see, there's a check mark on the certificate that says meets GCR section 18. The other thing that you might see is alternate design, in which case there would be numbers filled in on the back of the certificate. And the homologation certificate is supposed to travel with the logbook and the car. So that basically tells us that the cage has passed muster and we don't need to look at it all that carefully. There is a mandatory upgrade section, and the mandatory upgrade primarily consists of side reinforcement, and this car is fine on the side reinforcement. Some older cars you may find yourself having to look at how that's done. So we don't worry too much about a lot of this. We find that we've got good padding on either side. Now the seat in one of these cars is basically the bottom of the car, so issues like seat mounts aren't really terribly relevant, because what seat there is going to be held down by the harness. We do of course want to check the belts. These are FIA belts and their expiration is this year, so these will be good until the end of 2019. So I make a note of that. We will fill that in the logbook later. Note that there's no window nut because it doesn't really have a window. A driver in a car like this will be expected to have arm restraints, and those are part of the personal gear, and we usually inspect those when we do personal gear. But the arm restraints are basically used to limit movement of the arms away from the body by attaching to the shoulder harness. Note that these are what we call pull-down harnesses, which is to say is that you tighten them by pulling down. Many people in open-wheel cars will use what are called pull-up harnesses, which pull in the opposite direction. That's a matter of personal choice. People with crew often will use pull-up because the crew standing outside will yank up on the harness. That just depends on circumstances which one you do. So a lot of the stuff that we inspect in a sedan isn't relevant. The engine is in back, so this is really the firewall. There is no firewall forward. The floor, good condition. Well, the floor is just a piece of sheet aluminum. Fire system right there. This is a slightly older one, so it just has a gauge. That one's relatively easy to see. In some of these cars, it's actually kind of hard to see that. You see the battery is located right next to the fire system, and it's a sealed gel cell type battery, so it does not require an external case. This is a normal type of battery for this kind of car. It'd probably be good to have a little piece of tape over that screw, and consider your wrist slapped. And it's really all pretty clean. If we step to the front, something I want to point out is the cluster of master cylinders here. You see that there's a total of 3. One of them is for the clutch and 2 of them are for the brake. One of the brake masters will do the rear brakes and one will do the front brakes, because in a car like this you can turn a knob to adjust the bias of how much braking is forward versus reverse, because in dry pavement you tend to want to have braking done in the front, and in wet pavement you want to move the braking to the back because you run the risk of spinning the car if you have too much brake forward. So this is a pretty standard configuration, and yes, it's hanging out there, so if there is an incident, that's actually kind of exposed, and drivers in a class like this are just kind of used to that. It's something that you have to repair. What I'd also point out in this view is that this is representative of a car from after the aerodynamic revolution started. So you see that the springs and shocks in a car like this have been moved inside the bodywork. And that this rod right here basically reaches inside the bodywork in order to operate the springs and shocks. We'll move to the back of the car in a minute and we'll be able to see how they did that in the back. In terms of physical construction, we have a fiberglass shell, and then if we step up here and look back inside the passenger compartment, what we see is that this car is really, the tube frame is the car. This is just body work. And it all comes off of the car. Now we come back to the firewall area, and what we see, and I'm reminding myself of this detail, in a lot of cars the fuel cell is underneath the seat and there needs to be a metal bulkhead protecting the fuel cell. In this car, fuel cell access though is from the engine compartment. And if Jim, our cameraman and regional executive of MOHUD, will step over here, you can just barely see the fuel cell on the filler neck down there.
It's too dark.
Okay, it's too dark to show up, and so we may post a photograph of it with a flash later. Engine in this car is a Ford 1600, which is the traditional Formula Ford motor. The class is now named Formula F, or formerly Ford, because a Honda Fit motor has been approved, and many people have gone to the Honda motor because the Ford parts are getting a little dicey. It's a pretty old motor. It goes back to the 60s. So now we're looking at the back end, and main things we worry about back here is we're looking to make sure that it's clean, no leaks. We got to make sure that there are catch bottles for the coolant and for the oil breather, and they're back here. That'll be clearer when we post a flash photograph later. See back here is a good example of the inboard suspension, is that we just basically, the upper control arm goes into the suspension and links to the shock and spring. In a car of the 60s or early 70s, the spring and the shock would typically be out in the airflow. You see relatively simple pieces. The nice thing about cars like this is the corners are designed to come off so that you don't damage the core of the car. That's why these cars can take pretty heavy hits and still be back out in the next session, because it's pretty straightforward to unbolt all of this stuff and replace it. Okay, we do actually have a breather here for the gearbox, and that's actually going to a dump. Actually, this is the exception rather than the rule. The rule requires you to feed that to a catch bottle. The truth is nothing ever comes out of these transmissions unless you crack it open. And a lot of people just run a little pigtail, and we let that go because we know that these things never blow all of their lubricant out.
This one is routed to catch bottle that is in front of the motor to meet the letter of the rules.
Right. So, I mean, this is, you know, absolutely perfect compliance with a rule that very few people comply with. Now, I think we've actually pretty much covered it because these cars are straightforward. The exterior, there's a neat and clean rule. This car is neat and clean, so I don't get to slap Chip's wrist. Letters and numbers, the black on yellow is extremely visible. One of the most common mistakes in letters and numbers is to fail to understand which colors are dark and which colors are light. For example, red is a dark color, and you may think that your black numbers on a red car are really cool and nobody is going to be able to see them, and you will get called in and your wrist will be slapped for your black numbers on a red car or your red numbers on a black car. So pay attention to colors, it matters. You see that he has the weight on the side of the car. In general, in the SCCA, most cars need to put their weight on the side, some do not, but it is convenient and polite to have it even if it's not a requirement, so we encourage people to do that. It just makes it go faster if we are weighing cars, if the weight's on the side, so we don't have to look it up in the book. We occasionally will pull in cars and audit the weight numbers on the side of the car to make sure that nobody's fudging. Not that I think anybody really does that, but we want to remind them that they shouldn't start. And so this really covers it. This is an easy car to inspect. The other thing I'll point out though before we go, because I just realized that this is an issue with the open cars, we have a fire pole here, and you see there's an E sticker and the fire pole because the sticker tells the corner workers where the fire pole is. This is a mechanical cable, very similar really to the cheesy choke cables you can buy at Advance Auto or wherever. In an open car that gets raced in the rain, water gets down into these, and so it's very important every time you go through the car in the winter to disconnect the cable from the fire bottle and make sure it operates, because we have had people come up with those cables rusted up. And if it's rusted, you're not going to be able to use the fire system when you need it. And I want to thank Chip, and I want to thank Jim Bucci for being our cameraman today, and Bob Carl for being our host, and we're going to wrap this up. So until the next time.